Good morning. I'd like to call the Budget Committee to order and ask for approval of the October 7th committee meeting minutes. Moved by Mr. Monroe, seconded by Mr. Kenny. Any additions, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Carried. Well, as I indicated at the last committee meeting, by this meeting here, we'd have it pretty well nailed down, and I think we do have it pretty well nailed down. We're looking at currently at a 1.56% property tax increase in the levy. We were shooting for 1.57, but we got 1.56. Some of the revenues that are included is we budgeted $500,000 for the casinos, the Indian casinos, the revenue from those. The sales tax, we increased 1.5% over what's currently budgeted of $49,900,000, which amounts to $748,500. Which half is to the county, so it's $374,000, approximately. The health insurance, as we talked about last meeting, went from an 8% increase to a 4%. That decline saved us $463,000, but there's also an increase of $417,000. So. There's approximately a 2% decrease in the retirement. That's based on Tier 4 contribution rates. For this year, it was 20.8% contribution rate, and it's been lowered, I believe, to 18.6%. Some of the things that we had in the budget and we took out, there's no money in there for the radio communications. We had put in $60,000. But we removed that. We feel there's a very good opportunity to obtain grants. We'll know more about that in a month or 6 weeks as to the guidelines for applying for the grants. So with any hope, we'll get some grant money and probably have to borrow or band some money to if we want to move forward.
I don't think they have that.
We had put in $50,000 for additional contingent money. That was removed.
I don't have that.
There's a 2% pay increase for everyone, with additional increases for 22 positions, and I believe you have a list of all those before you. It's $238,777 for increase in the snow and ice contract, which increases the rate for plowing the roads up to almost $6,800. Oh, it's probably $30–40 below that. Westmount is funded through the end of May. I believe you have the sheet that Rob Lynch put out, and you can see it was $9,150,000, and now it's budgeted at $3,883,000. Also funded is 10 correctional full-time correctional officers. That's the 7 that we hired this year. Yes, right.
I have a little trouble following it. Are you looking at anything in particular here?
No, I'm just going down my my notes here. So we funded the 7 that we've already hired. We've funded 3 more for January. Three will be hired in January, and we delayed funding on the other 3 until July. That's a savings of $180,000. Also funded is the 10 full-time equivalents and some additional overtime, because you have more people, you need more overtime. Another position is a part-time attorney for the county attorney's office, in the amount of $35,000. There's a full-time assistant, budgeted for veteran services. That's an additional $25,000. However, we anticipate, receiving 50% funding, through Medicaid, in cooperation with DSS. But that's not definite yet, it should be in a couple days. Other counties are doing that. Also included is the reallocation for the, social services, caseworkers, for $36,500. And the additional HR position at $55,000 is currently in the budget. To get to where we are right now, we removed, or I removed $87,500 from the machinery budget, which, brings it flat rather than an increase. It's the same amount that he has this year. And also, removed $170,000 from bridges. Currently, there's, $428,000 setting in bridges. We didn't really get a straight answer yesterday as to if some of it should be encumbered or not encumbered, so, we took out the additional $170,000 that he was requesting.
I have a question, Tom.
Yes, Bill?
On this sheet here.
Yep.
Traffic Safety Board, that executive secretary. I was a member of Traffic Safety Board for 10 years, but
Right.
I haven't been in 8 years, probably. They met every other month, sometimes for 15 minutes.
Right.
I don't know if it's changed. Gene, has it changed?
That's one I didn't mention.
A half hour every other month? Why do you need to add an executive secretary?
We didn't add a secretary, we added 6 hours to,
Why add anything to it?
Patty Miller's, time. Her reasoning was, I'm not sure I can recall her at the moment.
It's for other services beside, just attending the meeting. She's actually out there actively promoting Stop DWI. So that's, and then there's also a number of other, matters that she has to actually prepare, budgets and other things and funding sources for the Stop DWI program, as well as distribution of funds.
Yeah, distracted driving.
Distracted driving is a big thing, yeah.
Yes, Evelyn?
Speak about this at our last meeting, and it's my understanding that some of her position is reimbursed through Stop DWI, but not all of her time. She does distracted driving and other things, so we can't actually continue to claim reimbursement against Stop when we're actually doing other things. So it was her proposal to add the 6 hours so that we were not billing for things that we weren't actually doing, and so that we could, stay on the right side of the grants. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Kevin?
Right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, this past year, I asked her to start attending more events on off hours. So what she does is when you have the New York State basketball tournament, she goes and talks to the participants and the public about the pitfalls of DWI and underage drinking. So she's out there more in the community. There's some events I went to in Albany County, and they have a multitude of tables set up, multitude of information set up at some of these public events. So I know that Patty is out there working on more her off hours than in office hours on certain events. So I thought it was a valid increase in the time.
So that's where we're at, and, yes, Mr. Taylor?
With the state taking over Medicaid, I guess I've kind of lost track of where we are. Is there any reduction in staffing because of that this year?
The issue with Medicaid is that it's 100% funded, so it doesn't have an impact on county budget.
Okay.
Except to the extent that we were talking about the veterans position. Right now, there is one vacant Medicaid position, and they're keeping it funded because it is 100% reimbursed. And part of that money is what's going to be used to pay the balance of what we need to make the veterans secretary full-time. But there is a state changeover in the works. It's just gonna take a while before ultimately, that is completed. But we think that even in the end, there'll be some sort of Medicaid presence even then in social services.
Yes, Fred?
A question on, legal defense indigents. We showed revenue this year, 53,000, and none for the next 2 years.
Right.
Why is that? Did the state cut it out, or did they move it, did it go under public defender?
Oh, that's the, this started back a few years ago. If you recall, Warren County used to get, I think it was like $200,000
Right.
towards indigent, defense, and it was just money that came in and offset our budget.
Right.
The state then changed their entire approach and said, we're gonna start decreasing that amount of money, and this is, in fact, I think this was the last year. And then we're going to require you to apply for grants and make improvements in your legal services in order for us to fund you. And so that's what's happening now. Which just as an aside, I will mention, this is something we opposed, as a county.
Right.
We felt that this was an unfair mandate. This was extensively actually pursued by your mandate committee a couple of years ago, and we were disappointed in the results, of that effort. We thought we made some very, very good arguments why Warren County should not be put in the same position as all other counties, concerning this matter, but we weren't successful.
Did they shift it? I see that under public defender, that goes from nothing this year to 62,700 next year.
That's the grants that we applied for.
Okay, so,
Right.
so it's not really a net loss, it's just switch from,
Well, the problem is it's restricted. You have to use it to improve your services, so they're buying new equipment, they're adding people. I mean, it's a different program than what we were under.
Yeah, you can't supplement. I mean,
Right.
you can't pay for what you're already doing, you have to do something new.
One other question, in the Beach Road parking lot, I see we have 152,000 expenditures, the last 2 years. I assume that's probably the capital expenditures we're gonna have next year, that we budgeted this year, we're just not gonna spend it this year? Because it doesn't cost 150,000 to operate that parking lot, does it?
Wouldn't think so.
Oh.
And,
Oh, is he looking at this one?
there's a page number here, but, like the third
Remember?
page in,
Yeah.
the second page, on the back of the second page, shows 200,000 revenue and 150,000 expense.
I believe that you are correct with that, although we can verify that to be sure. Rob, do you have an answer on that?
Yeah, that represents the, Village of Lake Shores portion of the, parking meters. We take in the whole amount and then we pay the village.
Oh, that's where they get the
portion.
1/4%,
Okay.
that's not Westbrook Road. Okay, I was thinking Westbrook.
I was thinking of Westbrook
Yeah,
too, you're
yeah,
right. The
right.
Beach Road is different.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's, where the village gets 75% of it.
Yes, Dan?
The, buildings and fire code, there's a reduction of 30,700. Is that, where's that step from, is that a?
That's a part-time position we're
Right.
eliminating.
All right, we eliminated,
In the, inspections that they've been doing, the fire inspections that we started a couple of years ago?
don't think so.
My recollection is that this was a,
I think it's a part-time,
part-time position eliminated,
code.
but.
yes, that one.
Oh.
It was it was what, Mr. Wallace brought in for, that's
Right.
what he wanted to
I
do,
can speak
so.
to that position. It was, it's been vacant for probably just about a year now, possibly a little longer. When Mr. Wallace took over, There was a retirement, and they left it vacant to see how they would do. If it got busy, the intent was to fill it. I think at one point we may have approved to fill, but just never actually did so.
I remember him coming before us,
Yep.
and he was gonna leave it open and see how it went, and I'm
He-
just,
he-
that is the one,
That's
so
the one,
everything's
and
gone
it's been
fine.
open the entire year. They've been keeping up just fine. The office is running very efficiently, and so when we came to budget this year, it was Mr. Wallace's proposal that we go ahead and let that position go. You know, if it gets really big with growth, he may come back in future years, but as of right now and for the short term going forward at least, he doesn't see any need for that particular position and thought he could save the county a little money by eliminating it. So that's why that's like it.
Thanks, Ed.
Mr. Beatty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to dissect a lot of this information. This is nothing against anybody, but I'm just looking on the top of one page, and our county administrator is getting a 2% increase, which is probably well deserved. But then we have a salary adjustment of $5,400. I'm just,
Right.
explain that one to me, please. Thanks.
Well, when the former county attorney became county administrator, he kept, he got an increase for county administrator, I don't remember the exact amount, but it put him at the 129. And that was in 2010. And he hasn't had a raise since then. And, if he'd have just gotten 2% over the years, he would have been at 135,000 currently.
For 215, not currently.
Right. So, when he first took over, he was doing the administrator's job and the county attorney's job for, quite a long time until, Martin Afferty was hired. So, that's the reason. Also, it's still in the budget is the HR position, and, after, it was put in there prior to, Friday's meeting, but, since Friday's meeting, I said leave it in the budget, and, I figured that we should, discuss it here today. I guess if the committee so feels that it should be taken out, it can be taken out. I know there was, been quite a lot of discussion about that position. I've been on both sides of it. I kinda think that we, at the beginning of this year, we didn't have an HR person. We had a civil service office. A lot of that work has fallen onto the county administrator and the county attorney, who could probably be spending their time, in my opinion, better, doing their jobs rather than, dealing with discipline issues or personnel issues. Not but what some of them are gonna go to them anyways, but, I don't think that's the first place we should land. So we established an HR office. We hired Gretchen as the director. She's hired an executive assistant, which, there's been some discussion about that person's pay. From what I've been informed, Gretchen has a 4-year degree in human resources. I think she's making $42,000 a year. Or not Gretchen, I mean, Jackie, I'm sorry. If Gretchen were to leave, there's probably a pretty good chance that, Jackie could step in and do the job. So, we're ramping up a HR department. I think it's important when you got 800 plus employees I think it can keep you out of a lot of trouble and, keep everybody on the same page so that not every department's doing a different thing, you know, as far as, how they get their information to the treasurer's office or a whole multitude of issues. And I think, at this time, I kinda think that department probably needs some help for a year or two. That's my feelings about it. Just to get ramped up, the former budget officer, talked about merit pay, performance-based, pay raises. I think that's an excellent idea, but you have to get there too. I mean, you don't just say that and it happens. You know, somebody has to administrate that, do the reviews, and look at the information and make recommendations. So, yes,
I don't mean to interrupt you if you wanna finish.
I'm just about done. So, in any event, at this point, I think it's necessary to, get caught up and get a HR department established. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's half and half. It's half for civil service and half for HR. It's not completely HR, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And, I think when the work's done, if the department is still staffed the way it is now, then the person should be let go, basically, after a year or two. That's my feelings. So. Yes, Dave?
I think it was left at personnel, we are going to discuss this. There's some other issues that are associated with this that need to be talked about, I guess, with all the supervisors brought up to snuff, so that we look futuristically, properly, how we move forward. And I just found there was some irony in it that when we put these budgets together and how much hard work they are, as far as some of the jobs we've had to eliminate over the years, et cetera, that the former, what I call the human resource gentleman, Todd Lunt, you know, was informed at a meeting like this, that his job was eliminated, we didn't need personnel director, and it was budgetary. And a couple of years later, we're at the table arguing that we need an assistant. And, you know, we had a vote at a meeting Friday about it for a mere $4,000, and that vote, you know, was for not to spend that money. And then, you know, we're putting the money in anyways in this budget. So, I think needs to be a lot of ironing out at personnel as far as where we're headed with this department. That I have been supportive of.
That's why I left it in the budget, 'cause I think the discussion needs to be had. I think, you know, there's been a lot of things said, and, let's hash it out. Let's get to it, you know, the way I see it. Stop talking in the shadows, let's hear it. Yes, Gene?
Well, you know, that was a very confusing thing, and I agree with what you just said. And you just said that we're gonna hire a full-time person, and then maybe in a year or two, we might not need them, and we'll get rid of them. Why don't we stick with part-time people? Why don't we hire 2 part-time people? I mean, the point is, you're bringing in somebody, and we need the help, but it's not just a salary, it's the bennies, it's the health insurance, it's the days off, it's the vacation pays, those are the things that are costly. Where you get 20-hour part-time person, you can have 2 of them for the same price. You wanna put 1 in there without the bennies. And I've always, and I believe in it, that, you know, it could help a lot. Then if you find in a year from now, you're not laying, you just get rid of 1 part-time person and still continue. But I think you save money and there's a lot of people out there today that are qualified and are willing to work, even if it's part-time because of the job situations. But I think some of these jobs could save us money in the long run and benefit us in the other end as far as getting people in their works.
Yep, good idea, yeah, thought.
I agree with some of Gene's thinking, but on the other hand, I think we have to plan for continuity in that department particularly. We're dealing with our employees. It's one of the largest and best assets that we have in the county. And I think that it's only appropriate that we have a department that is staffed to make sure that that, those people are treated properly. I agree with leaving the money in the budget. We can have I think at our next personnel meeting, we should go into an executive session and really hash this out. Then if we come out of that and say, hey, it should come out, I think you could take it out at that point.
Okay. That's what I'm looking for. Yes, Evelyn?
I take Jean's and Bud's and Dan's points very seriously. I think they've got some excellent points here. We certainly need the help in human resources, but we also need the help in civil service. Any of you guys that sat at the civil service training realize we've got quite an endeavor in front of us. We have a lot of things to be sorted out. I think one of the problems is we say human resources / civil service, but none of us really know how much time are you doing for one, how much time are you doing for the other. I know I had a brief conversation with the administrator last week. One of my concerns is if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. And I think that what we should be looking to do is dedicate some staff to civil service or to human resources as we see the need. Certainly with part-time, there's always the potential to move up to full-time. You know, if they're only going to be doing part of one and part of the other anyway, there's no reason that we couldn't explore the part-time aspect with the potential in the future to move up. But I've got some serious concerns about putting this position in. Bottom line is we put them in and we say we're going to take them out in a couple of years, and then 3, 4, 5 years down the road, we find they're still here. A lot of times once you get them in, they become a member of they establish within the community here at the workplace. It's very hard to get rid of somebody, and we're not ever in favor of going out and cutting a job to an employee, particularly budget time is always just before the holidays. It's a hard thing to do. And I just think that once we put these in, they're incredibly difficult to get out. And if, we do need to do something with the staffing, I would feel much more comfortable doing some kind of part-time, and whether we get 2 part-time people and we send one to human resources and we send one to civil service, or how we decide to work that. But as far as putting in a full-time human resource / civil service, we have no idea what the time division is there, and if we're really hitting all of the buttons that we need to be hitting. I'm just not comfortable with it, and so I would prefer to either go the part-time route or not at all. Thank you.
Thanks. Dan?
I just, I don't know all the particulars, but I certainly needs to be aired out, but there's some irony here that I see that needs to be addressed, and that's, I know there's been several meetings with the civil service and the HR and how it's set up, and I know this is a department that we're trying to create in the best way it will help the county. But when they're having meetings with the county administrator to sort things out how they go forward, and then at a monthly meeting, we're prescribing 50% here and 50% here. I mean, that's not our job, but that's what we're prescribing. So here we are, Human Services is having a problem interdepartmentally, and they're supposed to be taking care of all the other departments when these issues arise. So I think we need to fix the core before we go out and help the rest of the county, and that's where I'm kind of baffled with where we're heading. I mean, we can put all kinds of people in that department and justify all kinds of work, but if it's dysfunctional from the start, or there's problems with the way we move forward, that needs to be taken care of pretty quickly, or we're going to have something here that is a waste of money.
Okay. Yes, John?
I agree with you. I think that it should be left in the budget, and Dan says that the Personnel Committee will vet it, will learn a little bit more about it, and see the need for it. I understand that, from what I'm learning, there is a bridge between human resources and civil service. So have a bridging person doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world. And like Dan says, how are you going to allocate the hours based on, you really don't know what the issues are and what the job entails. And Chairman, I basically agree with your summarization though.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments? All right, well then, I think personnel is next week? Is it next week or?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Right?
2 weeks. That's fine.
Be after.
Yes, Gretchen, please.
I'm Gretchen Stepp, I'm the Director of Human Resources. there's been a lot of conversations about my department. A lot of those conversations have happened without including me. I went through an interview process last year. The Personnel Committee had a very defined job description and had very specific expectations of what they were looking for in a human resource director. There had been months of conversation about changing the department and hiring in the right person to lead the human resource civil service function. I went through that process. I was selected for the position and thought that I was very qualified. I have a master's in human resource management. I have 25 plus years of experience in this discipline. I'm the president of the Adirondack Human Resource Association, and I also teach human resource management for the College of St. Rose and at Adirondack Community College. I help prepare people for their certification in human resource management. I consider myself to be a very well-qualified person in the human resource arena. When we're talking about my department budget and the request, Mr. Lehman had an article in the newspaper today about the department and the discussion that happened on Friday. And the budget request for human resources and civil service is less than, it's a little more than 0.25% of the budget of Warren County. And the human resource and civil service function, we have a tremendous amount of responsibility in this organization. We have our fingers on the entire employment life cycle of people who come into Warren County. Folks I haven't even met with who have retired, we still interact with those kinds of folks all the time. And so we also are dealing with the bargaining units all the time and all the rules and regulations that go along with the language within those bargaining units. And so our department is currently a work in process. There's no doubt about it. I was just hired in January. We have a personnel technician who's been with the organization 26 years. Everybody else in that department has a very short tenure. And so I look at us as a work in process. And one of the comments that was made last Friday, talked about the comparison between our growth and other departments' growth, which is, I think, is an unfair comparison because we're a work in process. Other departments within the enterprise are mature organizations that have had structures and people who have been in place for a long period of time. And I can tell you that I have a great deal of experience in this particular discipline of human resources, but I don't have a lot of experience with Warren County. And I can tell you that the systems and processes and rules that you currently have in place are very difficult for new people to come in and just get right away. You have over 900 employees, and so you have 33 departments. And so within that, there's a tremendous learning curve that comes with everybody in my department. And so it's an unfair comparison to look at a mature department in comparison to a new work in process like our own. The other thing is that we do require sufficient resources to get the job done. We have a tremendous amount of responsibility between complying with civil service law and making sure that our compliance needs are met from a human resource point of view. We just have a tremendous amount of responsibility. If you review my job description, which I presented to the Personnel Committee, actually, most of you have already seen that, but I talked specifically about that at your request during my PowerPoint presentation last month about exactly what my duties and responsibilities are. That job description is pretty weighty, and there's a lot of responsibility within that. And I'm doing my best to fulfill the requirements of that in my day-to-day responsibilities as well as the day-to-day responsibilities of everybody else within the department. And again, we have a learning curve that we're going through, but the job expectations are very specific. And also within that, we have a lot of compliance that we're responsible for. A lot of the things that we have to comply for are not nice-to-haves or mere suggestions. We're talking about employment law. We're talking about federal law that we have to comply with. These aren't things that we can just say, oh, we'll get to it someday. And we have many policies in place that are not compliant, and we're trying to do everything we can to put systems and processes in place to make sure we are compliant. But that takes a lot of work. When I started to make a list of all the things that Human Resources is responsible for, because I don't want to speak for Civil Service, even though it's within the department, the things that we're doing, hiring, onboarding, Human Resource Information System, 426 of the status change, we put all of those into our computer systems. We're in the middle of an upgrade in our New World Human Resource Information System, which also works in parallel with our financial management systems. We have a Novatime timekeeping system, which we are taking more responsibility for. We are responsible for compliance, position control, policy development, adherence to policies. We do salary surveys every week. We're responsible for benefits, explaining benefits to employees. We do employee relations, counseling, training and development. We handle unemployment insurance. We do exit interviews, references and employment verifications. We do retirement counseling. We give people disability credits when they've been out on disability. They come back, we give them leave credits for that. We handle FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act administration, which is huge, documentations, records management. We are the HR help and support. Anybody's got a question on systems and processes, they call us. Employment, equal employment opportunity and affirmative action. I'm also responsible for labor relations. I've been involved in one contract negotiations, but I'm also interpreting the contract regularly for employees and managers on how they manage their performance of their people. Contract management, we have many services that we contract for here at Warren County through Human Resources, and I'm responsible for those. Last month you approved us to go out for an RFP on one of them that was not meeting our needs, and we were spending a lot of money on, and we weren't getting any utilization. In the future, we're supposed to be taking on accruals, position budgeting, benefits negotiation, and then we're always doing special projects. I'm looking at turnover, and one of the things I can tell you in our human resource information systems, we have not been using those properly or appropriately. And so when we go to gather information to get, turnover numbers, length of service numbers and things like that, those things are not available to us. They should be in an automated system, but they're not because we've been doing workarounds for years. So nobody's been managing and administering those processes. We also have things on our network that are not organized, not uniform, and those things also have to be handled. So that was just a stream of consciousness list of the things that we're doing day to day. Those are the things that Jackie Figueroa is doing. Those are the things I'm doing regularly. Those are human resource disciplines. These are not civil service disciplines. So these are just some of the things we're doing within our department with 2 full-time people. The position we're also open 5 days a week from 8 to 5. We also have civil service tests that we do every other Saturday from January until June, from September to December, and those have to be staffed on overtime. And they have to have 2 people there because civil service law says you have to have a proctor, but you always have to have a backup. So we have to have 2 people at those tests every other weekend for most of the months of the year. And so right now, we've got 2 full-time people in human resources, and we have 2 full-time people in civil service and 1 half-time person in civil service. For the last 6 months, we've had this human resource assistant who was with us as an intern, and she started with us in May and has been with us and will be with us through November 20th. I've had her doing many special projects for civil service. She answers the phone, she handles a lot of inquiry, and she's been spending a large percentage of her time learning about eligible lists, testing processes, posting. She's been largely doing civil service. So the discussion that's been going on about having somebody 50% of the time HR, 50% of the time in civil service is not realistic. For those of you who have managed human performance, you know that you can't split a human being down the middle. And when you're looking at a department that has ebbs and flows of work, for example, in its civil service, we weren't supposed to have a patrol officer test occur until 2016. But civil service told us about a month ago we had to do a test in November. And therefore, we had to post, and now we've been getting applications. We're going to have a test in November, and so that has caused a tremendous amount of flow through our office, which we didn't expect. So we had a work plan for this temporary assistant, and now that work plan changed based on what was inflicted on us from outside. So we couldn't plan for that, but we had to react to it. And without having that temporary HR assistant, everybody else would have been taken off their other work, their daily work, to respond to that particular need. And so to be able to say that I'm going to divide someone's time, 50% HR, 50% civil service, is an unrealistic expectation. As a manager, you have to manage your performance, and most of that happens on a daily basis. And so sometimes it may be 75-25, but I can tell you if you decide not to fund the full-time civil service human resource assistant, it will hurt civil service far more than it will human resources. And so I'll be delighted to come on to the Personnel Committee meeting and answer any questions you have, but I hope that I'm giving you a flavor for the things that we're doing in our office. I had offered the Personnel Committee the opportunity to come down and tour the Civil Service office. That's when we were in our other location. I was the temporary personnel officer at that time, because I thought that it would be helpful for the committee to see the kinds of responsibilities that we are required to fulfill on behalf of civil service. And there were no takers. And so the offer was open, and the offer is still open. I'd be more than happy to have anybody come through our department and have a tour of every one of the workstations that we've got and what people's duties and responsibilities are. I think that our department is giving the county a great return on investment. I think we're doing good work. I get regular and positive feedback all the time. I haven't been feeling that from the Board of Supervisors, but I just wanted to say what we've been up to, and I'm very sorry that you're having to have these discussions about my department. Apparently, I haven't communicated sufficiently so that you had a good picture of the kinds of things that we're doing and we're trying to do every day.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Conover.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree with your assessment. This is a matter that'll have to, and I don't know where this is gonna fall in terms of its final conclusion, but I think from a budgeting point of view, I think that your recommendation is a good, solid recommendation in terms of where we are right now. I might also say that those of us that attended the interview process for Human Resources Director and that felt very strong about Gretchen, I am very pleased to see her eagerness to rise, to explain the needs of her department and the needs of this county. I for one would expect nothing less, and I certainly welcome it, and I think most of us, if not all of us, do. But I think at the moment, I think this is a matter that needs to go to personnel, needs to be dealt with at personnel, and but from a budgeting perspective, I think leaving it where it is right now, regardless of what the final conclusion, there will be ultimately a budget that's adopted. Ultimately, there'll be an organizational structure. Ultimately, there'll have to be some allocation of resource based on that organizational structure, and that whether full-time or part-time or whatever. And so I think putting this decision in neutral for a little bit here is probably a wise thing.
Okay. Mr. Taylor?
We were talking about discussing this at the next personnel meeting, which is a couple weeks out. I would propose, this is going to take quite a while. It's going to probably end up in executive session because we're going to be talking about individual performance.
Mm-hmm.
I would propose that we schedule a special meeting of personnel as soon as we can get the notices out, and just devote that meeting to resolving this issue, since it's becoming in the spotlight, so to speak.
Do that.
Okay?
You gotta need a motion for you, or put in a...
No, I just propose that we...
As the committee chair, Supervisor Taylor has the right to call for that, and Joan will arrange for the meeting to happen as soon as she can find time in her schedule.
Yeah, I just would like to hear from the chairman regarding the schedule.
I just wish you would do it any day but this Friday. I have an out-of-town engagement I can't not be at. And I think because I've been involved in the discussions with HR and civil service, I'd like to be there. If you can avoid Friday, that would work for me.
Yes, John?
Well, just a quick comment that, having taken the Civil Service 101 course and going from zero to some knowledge and realizing what I don't know, which is a lot, and also the undercurrent myriad of issues that I hear here and there on HR. I know Gretchen's got a gargantuan task that we've given her to do, and it's a new department, and I think she summarized it. I think we do have to give her some time and some personnel to get the job done, and let's see how this unfolds. But it seems that's the consensus here anyway.
Yep, I think so. So, unless the committee objects, we'll leave it in the budget, at least till after the personnel discussion. If that concludes that, you want to do something different, that's fine, but currently we'll. The other thing was the tax cap I know we're at 1.56, and, I know I had indicated last meeting that we could've went to, I think it was 3.63. However, Paul's comment that only Star, registered people are eligible for this rebate, and, that's all well and fine, but the reason that, I'm not proposing any higher, tax levy is because, okay, the Star people get their rebate, but the businesses don't get a rebate. They end up paying whatever we increase it to. The second homeowners won't get a rebate. So, as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing's kind of flawed. I mean, if you're gonna give rebates, you give rebates to everybody, not just, the Star eligible people. So, that's why I went back down, to what we were last year, we're actually 0.01% under that. That was my reasoning there. The sales tax, we increased by 1.5% over what we have budgeted this year, so I guess in some ways, I guess we're probably doubling down on it a little bit, but, we did have a tax auction here last weekend. It produced $517,000. Now, whether we get that much, yes,
It wasn't quite that.
wasn't quite that,
I mean, we took in 650 something in bids.
Right.
But there was 150,000 in outstanding taxes against that, so.
okay,
it'd be about 400,000.
yep, right, so, okay, well, then 400,000. So, there's a lot of ways to look at the numbers. I mean, you can look at it however makes you feel good, I guess, but, to me, if you have that 400,000, and I think we'll probably come up short on our sales tax this year, which is why we only went 1.5% instead of 2.5%, that'll kinda make up for the shortfall. So, yes, discussion.
It looks to me like there's some increases and some decreases, but the real curve this year, of course, was the additional corrections of 1.156 million. That's a big number, no matter which way you cut it. And then if you look at the amount to be raised, the net amount to be raised, the increase of 14 over 15, we managed to cut that down a little bit. I believe, am I reading this correctly? Amount to be raised by the counties, the net differential, 636, 460. I believe I'm reading that correct on the final page.
Yeah.
36.
So, that could have easily have been, just on the corrections alone, that could easily have been twice that, right?
Right.
Or more. So, I think that, just looking at that item alone, Mr. Chairman, I think you've done a tremendous job, you and the staff have done a tremendous job here, because we had added to our 15 operating condition over 14, almost 1.3 million new dollars that were required by the state of New York corrections. So that is really a remarkable feat, I think. I just wanted to point that out.
Yes, Peter.
Just a question on corrections. We're going from, we're adding 10 correctional officers in January.
Well, we already have 7.
Right.
But we have to fund them anyways,
But
we took it out of fund
just
balance.
if we're adding personnel to corrections, it would seem to me that there would be a corresponding decrease in overtime. There's on page 1 here, corrections is going from, part-time help is going from $85,000 to $255,000. Corrections overtime is going from $350 to $460. So I guess I thought part of the intent of adding correctional officers was to reduce overtime. So I guess I'm confused at that.
Right, the explanation that I received was that, because I felt the same way, in fact, I wanted to take it out, the 110. And, the explanation I got was if you have more people, you have more people on vacation and, more people with days off, more people that get sick. So you end up having to you still gotta fill the post, so that was the explanation I got.
Well, and Mr. Budget Officer too, the other explanation is please recall that this overtime line has been underfunded in the past. And in fact, we went way over, as you know, last year, we'll go over this year. And, so as a result, we're actually bringing it up to account, if you look at the totals that we've been going over, we'll actually go down from that. But as you've mentioned, Mr. Budget Officer, there's also the additional posts now, so they create some overtime. So it all kind of balances out in the end. But I think in the if you look at total numbers, I think there will be a slight decrease in overtime. That's my recollection. Rob, would you agree with that? Did I catch you off guard?
Not sure if there'll be a decrease in the additional posts, but I know that the additional money will get back on track where the actual costs were.
Right.
Yes, Kevin?
I'd like to address that. I too somewhat agree with what Peter said. When we did the initial dispatching, when we talked to the sheriff, and I don't know if you had this conversation, I've had this conversation with the sheriff. When we did the initial addition of the Glens Falls dispatchers, we did talk to the sheriff about, in the future, once you got settled in, and you were able to decrease the number of dispatchers, we ought to look at that. And it took a couple of years, 3 years. I think the same thing will happen here, Peter, with the overtime costs. I think it'll be up to them to understand the staffing requirements, and eventually, I would say that it has to reduce the overtime costs. It only makes sense. You add more full-time, you're gonna reduce the number of overtime. And we did have to add more part-time because that was part of the study also, to add some full-time equivalent. So I believe that the overtime costs will be reduced in the future, but I think we need to give them a chance to manage the department with the new post in place, and I certainly will be one to keep talking to the sheriff and the corrections captain about trying to reduce the overtime costs. But it makes sense to me, but the same thing, if you remember, we did the same thing with dispatching Glens Falls. Our initial reaction is we took 4, we asked Bud to continue to look at the communication side of it, and he did, and he reduced one dispatcher, and I think the same thing will happen with the overtime going forward. We certainly need to keep it to the forefront, but I think you're right. Assuming, like I did, but to just cut that number without letting it work itself through, I think we have to let it work itself through.
Gene?
Just, one, how are we doing on the West now? I mean, we've got, haven't heard much about it. Is it moving forward?
Yes, it is.
Possibility?
We hope to have, our goal is to have something to the Health Services Committee within 2 weeks. So hopefully this will, and actually we have, part of what we built into the budget is based on projections of when we think we can have a contract signed, and then calculating the number of months it takes to get through the Department of Health. So it's very critical that this happen very soon, and the county attorney is well aware of that, and we're actually down to the fine details of a contract which we'll be bringing back to that committee, and like I say, it should be within a couple of weeks.
Rachel?
Understanding that this is the first opportunity I've had since being elected in terms of reviewing the budget and moving forward with a vote to the full board in November. And correct me if I'm wrong, I understand we're presented with the budget as a whole, and we make our votes as a whole, not piecemeal on the budget, correct? Pretty much.
Well, technically what happens is that this committee serves as an input committee to the budget officer. The budget officer can file a budget, a tentative budget, in any form that he believes is appropriate after listening to the comments. So this, in the beginning, is really the budget officer's budget that he will file by October 31st. Following that time, it then goes to the full board, and at the full board meeting, the first meeting that you have, you'll set a public hearing on the budget, and at that time, motions can be made by the board to amend any given aspect of the budget. Then you have your public hearing, and once again, the board is still free to amend its budget after that. So, there will be a number of opportunities, but in the stage we're at right now is, this is really the budget officer's budget, and then it then gets turned over to the board for their consideration. And the budget office, this group here, the budget team, or budget committee, is actually for input purposes for the benefit of the budget officer.
Thank you. So it's been brought to my attention that perhaps I need to dig a little deeper, ask a few more questions, and be sure to be not confident but well educated about what I'm voting on and the process that's before me. And with that in mind, which is of course good advice, I have three areas that I have questions on, given the information presented to us today, which I do appreciate being emailed out last night, so many thanks to Joanne. The first being that I recognize some discussions are uncomfortable, but I also recognize that they have to be discussed. And so before I ask any of these questions, I just want to preface it with, it's not personal. And what I'm asking about are clearly in a factual basis. But the first being, I have a feeling that Supervisor Beatty brought up the issue of our county administrator's salary, because in Queensbury, this is something that we're asked quite a bit, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, I know all our towns can be vocal. Queensbury, I welcome it. I'm really glad they're vocal, and we have these great resources to be able to communicate with them as those that elected us. But my question with this, and I guess I'm a little confused, I'm looking for some clarification historically. And like I said, I'll try to be as brief as I can. I know I have three topics that I have questions on. When I look at this budget and the salary increases, and I look at the county administrators, by far it's the highest that's being requested at $5,420. There isn't anything else on here that's close to that, and I'd have to guess, I appreciate the explanation that, you know, there hasn't been an increase in 5 years, but I guess with some of these increases, they probably haven't had an increase in 5, 6, 7 years as well, or some that are not on this salary adjustment schedule. But
Well, that's,
well,
I don't believe that's correct.
okay, well, I don't have all that information, so I'm just wondering,
I'm
you know.
just trying to,
So everybody else has seen increases in the last
Right.
5 years.
right, one year, they did, let's see, I think they were doing like 2,400, but only certain people got 2,400.
Okay.
I think the next year, everybody got 800, and then other people got additional. Last year, everybody got 2%, plus, there were additional increases for certain people.
Right.
And again, this year, it's the same.
Okay. So I guess my question really is just historically, it was my understanding that when we didn't have a county attorney and our county administrator took over both roles, that those salaries, there was a stipend or some type of a salary combined to the base salary of the administrator position. And then at some point, he took over both roles, but that the salary at that point still remained the same. And maybe I'm wrong, and please correct me, because all I'm looking for is information on this.
No,
And then,
I think you're correct on that.
No, that's actually incorrect.
Good.
And those members of the board that were here at the time will recall, when I took over as county administrator in 2010, I also continued to hold the county attorney's position. The county attorney's position at that time was paying $111,000. The county administrator's position was paying $95,000. So if you look at both roles, then the sum total of both roles was, that's over $200,000.
Right.
And obviously, doing both roles, I knew that, you know, that certainly doesn't justify $200,000. When we had our discussions with the board at that time, or I had my discussions with the board at that time, it was trying to ascertain what would be a reasonable salary for me as county administrator, holding both roles, but also knowing that that second role would eventually go away. And also knowing that, or at least the plan was, is that I would not get a decrease. So it was not, the plan was not built as a stipend. It was built, and if there's any supervisors here that disagree with me, please, let's put it on the floor. But my recollection was that we made an agreement that my salary would be pegged at $129, that it would stay that way for 3 years. That's the minimal amount for 3 years, regardless of when the county attorney's position was filled. And in point of fact, it was thought that the county attorney's position would be filled sooner than it did. And so it was always anticipated that as part of the deal, so to speak, compensation, however you wanna consider it, as part of what I did for the county at that point, that the 129 was going to be the minimum salary going forward, and it would be locked in for 3 years. Ultimately, the role that I assumed as county attorney and county administrator actually lasted longer than we anticipated. But I accepted that because the county was in tough times, and I felt that as county administrator, I should lead the way in that area and certainly do everything I could to help this county get through its financial difficulties. So once the financial difficulties had started to diminish, however, it then became time to adjust for raises. And quite frankly, I did not want a raise, I did not accept a raise during the past times that these were being adjusted, because my priority at that time was for the employees of this county. I did not want my raise to become an issue over these past few years when we were giving adjustments out to the other staff, because I was concerned that that would become the issue and jeopardize raises, quite frankly. So I chose myself not to accept any raises until this year, and this year, quite frankly, I looked around, I've considered the private sector, I've considered what other county administrators get, I consider what superintendents of schools get, I consider what the DA's salary is, I consider the fact that my salary has not gone up for 5 years, and so, as a result, that's how we came to the 137. But I just wanted to give everybody that explanation. Like I say, we're supervisors who were here at the time, so please correct me if anything I've said is incorrect.
Well, and that's all that I think we're all looking for, is just a historical perspective. You know, it's tough to walk in here and look at this whole list and not know, you know, I know both probably Doug and I have heard a lot of questions about it, so I think it's important to have that clarity. I hear you talk about bringing on this HR position and how that will decrease some responsibilities from the county administrator, and it should. You know, that should be in HR and civil service, so as you just mentioned, Frank. So I just wasn't sure the historical background, and I think it's important to have that in the minutes so that people can take a look at that and understand the history behind it.
Sure, no, I think that is important, but also I think it's important to note here again, it's not decreasing my responsibilities. It may be decreasing the functions I perform in HR on top of all of the other responsibilities I have to do as the administrator, just like I did when I was the county attorney as well as the administrator. The bottom line is, these jobs, whether it be the HR director, the county attorney, the county administrator, I mean, there's many jobs in Warren County, they're all consuming in terms of what you do. And it becomes ultimately, how much can you possibly do in any given day, no matter how many hours you put in. So there is plenty of work to do, I guess that's my point.
Oh, I know you're busy, Paul. There's no doubt. So that brings me to my second question, which, again, I'm sure that historically you can correct this for me as well. When I take a look at this, I'm a little surprised looking at our deputy treasurer. Again, it's not personal, Mike, but I'm looking at the deputy treasurer's salary, and then I'm looking at the stipend on top of that for the fiscal administration, which brings us to over $100,000, but yet our county treasurer is paid less than our deputy treasurer. Is that the setup in other counties? How does that work? You know, what's the rationale behind that?
Well, the deputy treasurer, first of all, performs a full-time capacity as a deputy treasurer to the treasurer. But in addition to that, we've always had somebody from the treasurer's office that also served as part of the budget team and works as on the budget. Spends a tremendous amount of time, especially this time of year, assisting with the budget, but also continues to work as an assistant to my office in budgetary type capacities, in addition to Joanne here. So that's how the stipend got started, and that was many years ago before Rob even became on board for this particular staff. Rick Murphy, for those that may remember, he was at one point the deputy to me to serve in that capacity. When Rick retired from the county, we were able to get Rob to assume that position, and that's how he got that stipend. So that's for an additional function over and above the deputy treasurer. As far as the salaries go for the treasurers or any elected officials, quite frankly, those have a deep history in the county. The history of the salaries have gone through various times where they were adjusted to try to get them to reasonable levels to recognize the level of responsibility and professional requirements, because you want to attract good people to those positions. So I know over the years the county has strived to get those salaries in somewhat reasonable condition, but also, quite frankly, I know it's very difficult for the elected folks who hold those positions to want to even receive raises, because they're here because they were elected. They don't accept raises easily. It's actually, quite frankly, just as myself for many years, it's easier for them to say no to a raise. But on the other hand, you have to think globally in terms of who are you going to attract to these type of positions, because deputy treasurer, sheriff, county clerk, those are positions that carry quite a bit of responsibility and certainly heavy workloads. And so that's how that kind of balances out, if that helps answer your question.
Well, I have not accepted a raise this year, neither did I in the first year that I was here. I did last year because I would've if I'd been given the chance. So, Mr. Lynch has been receiving raises, I have not, so that's why the salary is starting to skew.
Were you given the opportunity, you said not last year, but were you asked this year?
Yes, I was asked
Okay.
and I told him I did not want.
Okay. There's no doubt our deputies do a ton of work, you know, but I've never seen it where the position, the deputy gets paid more than your department head, so. I just wondered the historical perspective behind that, but lastly,
Another item that influenced that was that, Rob does not take, health insurance from the county, so.
Oh, okay, so we are able, do we do that in Warren, or just case by case specifically?
I don't know how he takes care of his health insurance, that's all I know about it.
No, but do we offer our employees a stipend if they don't get
No.
health insurance?
No,
No.
that does not happen.
But that, during the discussion, that was a point that was brought up.
Okay. Lastly, I just wonder, when I'm looking at this, I see some things like supervisor number 18 or 16 that are blank. I mean, certainly we know we've got names of supervisors, right? Or,
That's the vice
I don't
chairman,
under,
Evan and Ron,
I don't understand that
'cause
part
they
of it.
show up under,
Oh,
they wrote them in.
That's probably, the chairman and the vice chairman, maybe?
that's what we think, yes.
Yes, it is.
That's the chairman and vice chairman,
Yes,
so,
they just show up separately, but the report does not print their name in two places.
but they're on here somewhere else as well.
Right.
Yes,
Oh,
if you-
okay, I see, so it's the same thing with the budget office. Like Frank, you're on there somewhere else, but also as budget officer.
Right.
Yes.
And the coroner is the same, or no, the coroner's empty or vacant, coroner
No,
number
the
two?
coroner's position, one of the coroners are the same person.
So why don't we put names there? I'm
Well,
sorry,
it's
if it's tough for me, I assume it's...
It's a canned report from, New World. So it doesn't put the name in two positions for whatever reason, I don't know. But, I
Are
just
we able
know
to
this
write
'cause I've
those
done
in?
it so many years.
Okay, well, I'll write them in on my copy, but that confused me why we had the blanks there, and I knew we knew who the two other supervisors were, I just couldn't figure out who they were. Thank you for indulging my questions, I appreciate it.
No problem.
I keep asking.
Yes, Mr. Conover.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to, the, Sheriff's, Correction Division. I just want to point out that, the actual increase was $1.456 million. And, which is a lot of money. And that was mitigated, at least in part, by an increase in revenue, and I guess my question is, we feel comfortable with that revenue projection?
Absolutely.
That $300K?
The sheriff has actually, raised that 300 over, this year already. And we have every reason to believe that revenue will be available next year. And quite frankly, I have to take this opportunity to compliment the sheriff. He has gone above and beyond, what ordinary sheriffs' responsibilities are in terms of attracting federal, prisoners to our jail and having a reputation that he can handle that, and that's why we're getting that additional revenue.
Well, you sort of took my thunder there, but I would also applaud the sheriff and his organization. That really helped a lot. I mean, that otherwise that was almost a $1.5 million increase, and again, I would refer everyone to the last page of a $600,000 increase that but for that, we in a much better position going into this year, and especially as we consider new court facilities. That was a big hit. That was a very big hit.
Yes, Fred?
Just got a question. How's that working out with the federal inmates? Because I remember back in 2008, 9, and 10, you know, the sheriff really resisted that. We were trying to bring in extra revenue, and they had a number of reasons why he didn't want to do it, but.
It's working out excellent, and I think the reason for it is that the jail is run in a very, very, paramilitary, professional, manner, and I think that's what's enabled the sheriff to be able to do this now. I think you're right. At one point, there would have been some hesitancy, but, here again, to the sheriff's credit, and also I think that properly so, with credit, the sheriff would say it to himself, tell you himself, it's his staffing too. Mike Gates and other folks that he has as leadership in that facility, they have done a fantastic job in just running the facility. In fact, from what I hear, we get compliments on the way our facility is run, and so that's what enables us to be able to do this.
Gene?
Can I make one more stupid comment?
Sure can.
Everybody worries about salaries and wages. I'm just going over here as supervisors here. We got supervisors on this board that have been 12, 14 years, Mr. Kenny, Mr. Monroe, and they're making the same amount of money people just started this year. So, there is a reason for why a lot of things get done. I mean, you don't see any supervisors making more money sitting here after 10 years, than new ones are sitting here after 9 months, 10 months. So, sometimes wages are paid on the way that.
Yes, Mr. Wister?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a few comments. Appreciate all the work that went into this. I got home late last night from New York, and I haven't had a chance to make it. Been spending my time getting caught up. Do we have a updated 4-year plan chart? Yeah.
No, not since the last one, we didn't
That'll-
update it yet.
That'll change based on this.
Are you talking about the multi-year plan?
Yeah.
Yes, it will.
Likely, yeah.
You should know that, the use of fund balance is going to go back to the original plan, not the second one we put out, to make this budget work. Which is okay, but we want to remap that out, and we will, be presenting that document. But just so everybody knows, and this is one of the reasons why, and maybe we probably should have explained this right up front. Yesterday, the budget team met, the budget officer met with us, and we spent the entire day, preparing for today's meeting. Unfortunately, right in the middle of all of this, as you all now know, we had a bomb threat at the Human Services building that just took up. It was handled very efficiently. I mean, it only took up, the actual threat itself probably took up a couple of hours, but between, people were out at lunch at the time, having to come back, deal with that issue, and then we had to have a couple other meetings. We got finished very late yesterday, which is why we didn't get this information out as early as we would have liked for you today, and it's also why the budget officer had to just read through some of the items for you on the budget. But, just so you have that explanation as to what happened, with regard to this.
Thank you for that. I was not concerned about that. Thank you. I appreciate you getting it to us last night. I just haven't had a chance to look at it. I think the last 4-year plan that we looked at, I'm going off from memory, had $1.6 million that we were pulling from the fund balance. Is that correct?
It's 2 point something.
Well, we can verify this another time, but my recollection is this, is it was 1.6 million from the original 4-year plan, or maybe the second one. The last budget meeting, I think we had requests of an additional $1.8 million in requests that were not in the budget. That was at the last meeting, correct? We went through that itemization list. So, if all of that was, how much of that 1.8 million has been put into this revised budget?
We have that 1.8.
Let's see.
I know we didn't put in the, radio.
Right, that was 600,000. 50,000, for the, contingent was taken out.
So about $1 million was added?
Joanne went to get the sheet, from the, we just can't recall what was on that sheet at this point.
Well, maybe you can get back to me, 'cause that would be, you know, that would be about 2.7 million of fund balance to keep that percentage increase in tax at 1.56. That had come from somewhere, I assume.
Rob, I believe we went back to the original, which was a 360,000, does that sound right?
Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
Extra 360,000 from the fund balance? You recall that? We went back to the original, I thought?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where'd we make up the, other?
Well,
What?
No, I,
Increase some of your revenues out there, Mark.
Okay.
That one sheet.
Are these
Which
the
sheet
items?
is that?
we did this, no.
So we had increase in revenues.
Oh, here it is.
Where to make it up.
Okay, so Joanne's got the sheet. One of the items listed was the snow and ice for 238,000, which is included in the budget, as the budget officer mentioned. One of the items was $600,000 for radios, which we have determined not to include in the budget, as the budget officer mentioned. So that's 600,000 right there. And the reason for that is that we really believe that there will be grants available next year, to offset that cost. The other item was, the contingency fund. We had allocated, we're at 250, we wanted to move it to 300, but we decided to keep it at 250 to lower, you know, to keep that tax rate down. And, you know, it was a wish list item to bring it to 3, but we've been, you know, just squeaking by with 250, and we'll just have to keep doing that. Hazard mitigation plan, was 37.5, which is in the budget. Then we had the reallocation of the caseworkers. Now, please recall, the reallocation of the caseworkers was set at 139,000, but the issue of that is that really, most of that's funded by the state, so that figure got knocked down to, I think, in the 30s?
36.5.
30-something. And then also what was included on that list was $782,000 for the additional correctional staffing. And when you added up all those numbers, that came to the 1.8. Now, what is critical to know, though, is that in the multi-year plan, we had already built in that entire correctional staffing. So that was already accounted for in the plan. So that means that 782 did not have an impact on that sheet that you saw for the multi-year plan. So the only items that really affected the multi-year plan in the end were the snow and ice, the additional computer reserve, the 37,000 hazard mitigation plan, about 30-some-odd thousand for the workers, and then obviously the salary increases. But we also have had the benefit of receiving, or planning to receive, the casino funds, what do we call it, games of chance funds, I guess it's called. 500,000, that's new money into the budget. We're also planning a 1.57 or 6% in tax increase, so that'll be new money into the budget. And then we also plan a 1.5% increase over budget on the sales tax, so that'll be new money into the budget. So, and then we did a variety of cuts, and this is what makes it very difficult as you're trying to go through all this stuff, because right down to the end yesterday, for instance, one of the last cuts we made was in social services. We were trying to get the budget, because part of our philosophy is we don't want to increase taxes any more by, you know, percentage-wise, any more than we did the year before. So we had achieved, if you recall, last year we had achieved moving it down to 1.57, and we did not want to breach that threshold. So at the last minute yesterday, we were looking for additional cuts. One of the cuts came, just to give you an example, we call up Social Services Department and said, can you come up with additional savings? And they looked throughout their entire budget, and they were able to come up with an additional $36,000 worth of savings. So we did that with a couple of different departments, just trying to find where we can just squeak out some additional funds to bring that down when you get right, you know, when we get very close. The whole idea is because we believe that, one, we know that you want to keep the tax increase as minimal as possible. We certainly want to stay well under the cap, which we are. And then the other thing is we know you want to run a really efficient government that uses very, very little money and that has a plan. The other aspect that allows us to do all of this is that multi-year plan has turned out to be critical in helping us budget, because then we can figure how much of the surplus we can realistically use and see what the impact is going to be out the next 2 or 3 years and protect ourselves. So, the system is working, basically.
Great, thank you. I had a few more questions along these lines. This game of chance is new to this discussion today. Where did that come from? How secure is it?
Well,
This is,
No, I understand what it is, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to understand how secure it is in terms of, are we really gonna get this?
no, we actually received the first payment.
'Cause I'd never heard of it before until today, you know, it just came to the table.
Well, we've discussed it before.
Supervisor Westcott, we actually did receive the first payment, what was that, July, Rob? And, it's supposed to be paid quarterly, so we're expecting another payment any time right now. When this was first done, this was pursuant to contract with New York State, with the tribes. It's part of the reason why we can't have a casino in Warren County. You know, it certainly banks on the fact that the tribe does well. We're geared into whatever they make. But we believe, based on the conversations we've had with our assembly representatives, that this is a reasonable sum of money to expect each year. Is it guaranteed? I mean, as good as the contract, as good as their profits are, could it go up or down? It certainly could. But we, you know, here again, when you do a budget, you try to make reasonable projections.
Yes, absolutely. You've answered the question. I'm sorry, I mischaracterized it. It's the first time I've seen it within the budget. I know we've talked about it before, and I'm aware of the.
That's why we're planning several board supervisors' bus trips up there.
You're gonna have some, that's great. All 20 of us will go up there and have a rip-roaring time. Final comment, and then sales tax, 1.5% increase is on this year's budget.
Correct.
This year's budget is an increase of 2.5%, correct?
Yes.
We're at.
No.
2.5.
2.2?
Right,
2.2,
2.2.
right.
So we're at 1.4 for the year to date?
Right.
So we're still short of that, so the 1.5 could be higher,
That's correct.
yeah. So I just want everybody to realize that. So hopefully we'll have a good final end of the year, but if it's higher, that'll have to be made up somewhere, which would be fund balance, is that correct?
Well, actually, we feel pretty comfortable this year for a couple of reasons, as the budget officer mentioned. One, we have the monies that we did not account for anywhere in our budget. There's 2 items of money in particular. One is the funds that we'll get from the tax auction. That has not been accounted for in the budget, so that would go to the surplus. The other thing we did not account for is the gaming funds that we received this year. We should receive, I'm guessing, what, about a couple $100,000 at least this year, right, Rob, on that?
Well, if you get $100,000 a quarter, that's 400.
Yeah, so, but I mean, just this year alone, we should get 200 of that, I would think. So, we have not accounted for that money, so if we don't meet our sales tax threshold, we have these other funds that will help us, you know, make up that difference.
Great. So in the next meeting, we'll have the 4-year updated plan, so we can see how all these
Yes.
moving parts have come together. Thank you very much.
Mike?
Just one quick thing, the Westmount was only budgeted through May, I believe, is that correct?
Correct.
That helps with the expense side. That lowers the expenses there quite a bit, which helps.
That's an excellent point. If we had to deal with that, there would be a sharp tax increase for sure.
And we'd be cutting several other things that we aren't right at the moment. Yes, Fred?
As we, you know, struggle with this court system, need for more space, what would be really helpful to me, and I think I asked for it actually the last time, is a debt service schedule, you know, over a long term, like 15, 20 years, to show, you know, how we're using, how we're paying off that debt, because I think it's pretty clear that we'll have to bond any work we do in the courts, and it's gonna be helpful to look at how we could fit that bonding for that into our debt service, and maybe it's not as big a problem as some of us may otherwise think it is.
You're absolutely
In other
correct.
words, to have a capital budget that takes into account our existing capital debt.
Can I,
Yes, Mike?
Fred, every month in the budget analysis that we send out,
Yeah.
there's a complete payout of all the debt. So you're getting that.
Well, I
every
think
month.
it's missing some years, and I think it jumps, it lumps some of the last years altogether, I believe.
Well, it goes to the 5-year increments toward the end.
Yeah.
You base that.
Okay.
And the other thing, just as a point of interest, you know, every county has a debt ceiling, and when I went back and calculated our debt ceiling, we're at about 4.9%.
Yeah, we're nowhere near our ceiling.
But in relation to the rest of the state, we're in the bottom 10%.
I have no doubt.
Because I haven't had a chance to put it all together to present it, but we're in the bottom 10% of debt in the state.
I just make the point for this committee, I think it's important to look at that and have a capital budget, because I think it may encourage us to do something that's more, long-term, long-range planning than doing something short-term, you know, like leases for 20 years, when the courts, if we build new, should last 40 years, that type of thing.
Absolutely, though, that will be prepared as we go forward. Part of it is we need to really have a cost, though, to start
Right.
with, and we're kind of still jumping around on that a little bit.
Ron?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just would, like to make sure, Mike, that information gets distributed when you have it done, because I think it's very important information that I think people need to understand, the supervisors and the general public, that that our debt, level is, at least compared statewide, is extremely low, and we need to see that. We need to see that, especially if we're going to be doing some borrowing for the court. You know, people need to understand that we've been diligent and prudent with our borrowing, and that, and exactly where we set relative to that.
I also think that since we are starting this project next year at some point, there's gonna be some expense in 2015. I would think there would be some expense that we'll have to, at some point, account for.
It'll be 2016.
If we're gonna start the project, I would imagine that we would have to have some outlays next year. Everything won't be paid in 2016. We're gonna start work next year, in whatever capacity. There will be some sort of impact to the budget in 2015, I would think.
When we handle that with, bond anticipation notes,
Right.
which you wouldn't pay till the next year.
Yes, Mr. Chairman?
Just Frank, good job by you and the team on the hard work that goes in. So, the town dealing with these budgets, you know, I wish I could keep mine at 1.5%. The other thing, looking long range, may not be on our 5-year plan, but it's in our long range interest to keep track of what the legislature is doing to us with the 1%, the shared services, and then the 1% cut in funding the following year, or alleged 1% cut in funding the following year. So, you know, I think the budget team is keeping its eye on the long range spending, but also keeping their eye on what's gonna happen to each one of the towns, the school districts, and the fire districts, and all of us going forward. Is a 1% reduction in our budget eventually. So, I mean, that's something that we always have to keep in mind, and I applaud you for bringing it into this bill. We have our challenges going forward.
That's Mark.
Share those sentiments. In fact, I would ask that you take the mandated expenses, particularly for the new correction officers, and show what the budget would be without these mandated expenses, and it looks like you'd probably be right around a 0% increase. Might wanna break that out, just so we can show the taxpayers that in fact, you're holding the line on spending here, but it's the state mandates that are making us increase it at all. I'd like to see that broken out separately like that.
If you're interested in specific numbers, I think if you look at the sheet, there's a total on general fund, increase and decrease departmental requests. I believe there's a total of 1.2. I can recheck.
Back page, sure.
Isn't that correct?
Numbers are on the last page, but,
There a total on, total general fund, isn't the, the second to last sheet, total general fund, net budget increase, decrease 1.281, isn't that the number?
Correct.
And so, that would be the, year-over-year net increase, and if you then turn back to your corrections, the net's an increase of 1.156, it's almost all of it.
Yeah.
It's almost all of it. So that assessment's absolutely correct, that it was achievable.
That was the goal we set last year, was to get to a 0% tax increase, and I would say you have done it, Mr. Chairman. Well done.
Had a lot of help.
Lot of help, but thank you for your leadership on it.
Brian?
Thank you, Chairman. There's been some discussions, I just want to pass along some information. As far as the radio project and the grants that are available for that, there is round 4 of the Interoperable Communications Grant is coming out in 2 weeks. That's a $50 million grant across 60 counties. We've been successful in round 1, and we also were successful in the PSAP, the 911 grant. I feel very confident that we can do some real good with the round 4 grant. Right now, they have not pinned down exactly what it is, but the last round of this grant, the individual award per county was up to $6 million. I don't see them separating it that way this time, but I think we are in a really good position to apply for the monies to do some of this stuff that the consultant has asked us to do. So I know, Frank, you took it out of the budget, rightly so. From my standpoint, from the radio system, and I sit on the governor's board that runs this, I think we're going to be able to get some good things out of this. They're looking at some different ways to dispense the money. So the money, you get a larger grant, but it's spread out over 4 or 5 years. So if you had to use a bond, you could use that money each year to pay off the bond. There's a lot of different things that they're trying to do to make it easier for the counties to actually accomplish this work. So I'll keep you up to date on that. And like I say, I feel confident that we can at least accomplish a good portion of this work, of the $6 million. I think we can knock that down pretty well.
Good. Thank you. Yes, Rachel?
Quick question, on this sheet here, the one where all the different departments are broken down.
Right.
How come, like, human services, building number 11, I'm sure there's a very simple answer, but not really. Safety and a few other ones that there's absolutely no numbers from 2014 to the department request to your recommendation for this year. 4 or 5.
I believe building 11 was the old social services building.
Right, I think we tore it
It's still
down.
showing up historically.
Then what about human services? That's above it a few lines.
I'm not sure what that is. Do you, Ron?
That's the old human resources department. And they created the new one, they combined human resources, civil service.
Oh, okay.
So that's showing out then for the expenses for the HR department under civil service?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that should be, that's civil service / human resources.
Right.
And then also blank with safety and workman's comp. What? And planning, right? That was the planning.
Safety is an old, budget that we used to fund, but we don't anymore.
Workers' comp has been shifted into each department.
And then what about planning?
What is it? Oh, that was the planning board that we don't fund anymore.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that anyone would like to discuss? If not, a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Conover, seconded by Mr. Strauss. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Thank you.
That 1.5 million, that hurt. That hurt public works. That hurt.